I can lie still.
That won't save you. They're coming for us!
A good horse could keep a man alive through a Montana winter. It could carry flour over a snowed-in pass. It could drag firewood when the axe work broke your back. It could get you to town before fever finished what hunger started. Jonah Reed traded his last horse for a woman left to freeze behind a freight station. He told himself it was a stupid thing to do. By sundown, he would know it was worse than stupid. It was the kind of choice that reached into a man's quiet life, tore it open at the seams, and let the whole cruel world come bleeding in. Coldwater Station sat at the foot of the pass, like a bad tooth in the snow. It was not much more than a long shed, a stable, a freight office, and a crooked saloon with smoke leaking from the chimney. Men stopped there because the mountains forced them to. Nobody stayed there unless the world had run out of better places for them. Jonah hated Coldwater. He hated the smell of wet wool, cheap tobacco, horse manure, and old whiskey soaked into the floorboards. He hated the way desperate men laughed too loudly when they were scared. He hated how the station always seemed to collect the worst kind of souls during the winter months, the kind who looked at another person's suffering and saw a chance to bargain. But he needed supplies. So he rode in on his bay horse, Samson, with snow in his beard and a list in his coat pocket. Nails, flour, coffee, salt pork if the price had not gone foolish, powder, if any was left. He had a forge up on the ridge, a roof that needed patching, and a winter that was already trying to kill him. Jonah was a blacksmith by trade, though there were not many horses to shoe on the mountain. He repaired traps, fixed wagon rims, hammered hinges, sharpened blades, and kept to himself. Folks in the valley called him strange. Some called him rude. A few called him haunted, which was closer to the truth than Jonah liked. He had buried a wife 5 winters before and a child 2 days after her. After that, he learned silence was easier than conversation. Iron did not ask questions. Fire did not pity you. Snow did not expect you to smile. He tied Samson outside the freight office and stepped into the station with his hat low over his eyes. Inside, men crowded around the stove, boots steaming, shoulders hunched. A card game dragged on in the corner. Someone was coughing hard enough to bring up blood. A fiddle hung silent on the wall, missing 2 strings. Behind the counter, old Merritt counted coins with the slow care of a man who trusted no one. Jonah kept his head down and handed over his list. "Running lean up there?" Merritt asked. "Everybody's running lean," Jonah said. Merritt snorted and started gathering what he could. "You hear the pass might close by Monday?" "I figured." "Then you figured right." Jonah said nothing more. He put coins on the counter, then watched Merritt stack flour, coffee, nails, and a small sack of beans. No powder, no salt pork. Prices had gone mean. He was just about to carry the supplies out when he heard a noise behind the building. Not a scream. Screams were common enough at Coldwater. Men fought. Women cursed. Drunks fell. Horses kicked. Screams did not always mean a man had to get involved. This was different. It was the sound of someone trying very hard not to make a sound at all. Jonah turned his head. Merritt noticed and looked away too fast. That was enough. Jonah left the supplies on the counter and walked toward the back door. "Wouldn't do that," Merritt muttered. Jonah stopped with his hand on the latch. "Why?" "Freight trouble." "What kind?" "The Harlan Voss kind." That name sat in the room like a snake. Harlan Voss ran wagons over the northern road when the road could be run. He hauled tools, whiskey, blankets, seed, and sometimes people who had no better way west. He dressed like a businessman and smiled like a preacher, but everyone knew he made his real money off debt. He lent desperate people passage, food, coats, medicine, anything they needed, then kept adding numbers until they could never leave him. Jonah had met him once. Once had been plenty. He opened the door. The cold hit him hard, sharp enough to steal breath. Snow blew sideways behind the station, gathering in dirty drifts against stacked crates. 3 men stood near the freight shed. 2 were Voss's drivers. The third was Harlan himself, wrapped in a fine black coat with a fur collar, clean-shaven except for a narrow mustache that made his mouth look cruel even when he smiled. At his feet knelt a woman. Her hands were tied in front of her. Her dress was thin, brown with mud, torn at one sleeve. No coat, no hat, no gloves. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid and stuck to her cheek, where melted snow had frozen again. She looked young, though hunger and exhaustion had a way of stealing years and adding others. Harlan held a paper in one gloved hand. "I don't much care who takes her," he said to the men standing around. "Cook, washerwoman, bed warmer, field hand when spring comes. She owes $48.06, and I'm tired of feeding her." The woman did not look up. One of the drivers laughed. "She don't look like she'd last a week." "She lasted this long," Harlan said. "That ought to count for something." Jonah's jaw tightened. Another man from the station came out, hugging himself against the cold. "What'd she do?" "Stole from me," Harlan said. The woman's head moved then, just a little. Harlan noticed. He smiled wider. "Go on, Ruth," he said. "Tell them how you stole." Her lips were blue. When she spoke, the words barely came out. "I took bread that belonged to my company," Harlan said. "After I fed her, clothed her, carried her halfway across the territory, and tolerated her laziness." "You left Mrs. Bell's boy hungry," Ruth whispered. Harlan's smile vanished. He struck her with the back of his hand. The blow knocked her sideways into the snow. She caught herself on her bound hands and stayed there, breathing through her mouth, eyes fixed on the ground. Jonah took one step forward, then stopped. "Not your trouble," a voice inside him said. That voice had kept him alive for years. It had kept him from getting drawn into fools' fights, bad debts, broken marriages, town gossip, and every other human mess that seemed to multiply the second you cared about it. "Not your trouble." Harlan looked at the small crowd. $20 takes the debt off my hands. You can work the rest out of her." Nobody moved. A man near the stable spat into the snow. "I'll give 10. You'll give 20, Harlan said, "or I'll leave her tied right here till morning, and let God decide how much she's worth." Ruth still did not cry. That was what did it. Jonah had seen fear. He had seen begging. He had seen anger. This woman had none of that left. She just knelt in the snow like a body already halfway gone, waiting for the world to decide the method. Jonah turned and looked at Samson. The horse stood tied to the post, head low, steam puffing from his nostrils. Samson was old, but not useless, strong enough to haul wood, smart enough to find the trail in a whiteout, worth more than $20, especially in winter. Jonah closed his eyes. He thought of the ridge. He thought of the empty forge. He thought of how far a man could fall once he started taking in strays from the world. Then he walked to Samson, untied the reins, and led him toward Harlan Voss. Harlan watched him come with mild amusement. "Reed, didn't know you had interest in company property." Jonah stopped in front of him. "Horse for the woman." The crowd went quiet. Harlan looked at Samson, then at Jonah. "That horse is worth more than 20. "I know." "Then you're a fool." "I know that too." Harlan's eyes sharpened. No returns. Jonah looked down at Ruth. She had finally lifted her eyes. They were gray, pale, and cold as river ice. She was not looking at him with hope. Hope would have been easier. She was measuring him, the way a trapped animal measures the distance between teeth. "No returns," Jonah said. Harlan took the reins. One of his drivers cut the rope from Ruth's wrists and shoved her forward. She stumbled, but did not fall. Jonah reached out to steady her. She flinched so hard his hand stopped in midair. He lowered it. "Come on," he said. She stared at him. "Can you walk?" Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Jonah took off his coat and held it out. "Put this on." She did not reach for it. The men were watching. Some were smirking. Harlan leaned against Samson's shoulder, enjoying himself. Jonah stepped closer, slowly, and set the coat around Ruth's shoulders without touching her skin. The heavy wool swallowed her frame. "Walk," he said again, softer this time. She walked. Jonah did not have a horse now. He had a supply sack, a storm coming down hard, and a half-frozen woman who could barely stay upright. Behind the freight shed, he found an old hand sled used for moving crates. One runner was bent. The rope handle was frayed. He threw his supplies onto it, then looked at Ruth. "Sit." She hesitated. "You'll slow us down if you drop." That seemed to make sense to her. She sat on the sled without argument, knees pulled close, hands tucked beneath Jonah's coat. He took the rope and started pulling. The trail up to his forge climbed hard through pines and black rock. With Samson, it took a little over an hour in good weather. On foot, in fresh snow, dragging a loaded sled and a woman who weighed too little, it took nearly 3. The wind came at them sideways. Snow filled Jonah's beard, then froze there. His shoulders burned. His bad knee complained with every step. More than once, the sled caught on stone and jerked him backward hard enough to make him curse under his breath. Ruth never spoke, not once. At first, Jonah thought she had passed out. Then he glanced back and saw her sitting stiff as a fence post, eyes open, jaw clenched, fighting not to shake. The coat was wrapped around her, but her feet were bare inside ruined shoes. Dark stains marked the snow beneath them whenever she shifted. Blood. Jonah looked forward again and pulled harder. By the time they reached the forge, night had settled thick across the ridge. The place was built low against the mountain, half cabin and half workshop. The forge chimney leaned slightly, patched with tin. A woodpile crouched under a slanted roof. The front door stuck in wet weather. In deep winter, it stuck all the time. Jonah kicked it open and dragged the sled inside the workshop first, out of the wind. Ruth did not move until he said, "Inside." She stood too quickly, swayed, and nearly went down. Jonah reached for her without thinking. Again she flinched. So he stepped back and let her catch herself on the wall. The cabin room was cold but sheltered. Jonah crossed to the stove and worked fast. Birch bark, kindling, one match, then another when the first went out in his shaking fingers. The flame caught at last, small and blue, then orange. He fed it until the stove began to tick with heat. Ruth stood near the door, dripping snow onto the floor. Jonah hung his hat on a peg. "There's a chair." She did not sit. He took a blanket from the bed and held it out. "Wrap up." She looked at the blanket, then at him, then back at the blanket. Her hands came out from under his coat. The wrists were raw where rope had cut them. One had bled through frozen skin. Jonah's stomach turned. She took the blanket, but only held it against her chest. He did not know what to do with that. So he did what he understood. He put water in a pot. He sliced the last of an onion. He added beans already soaked from the morning, a little flour to thicken the broth, and the heel of salt pork he had been saving. While it boiled, he set bread on the table. "Eat," he said. Ruth stared at the bread like it might bite her. "It isn't a trick." That was the wrong thing to say. Her eyes moved to him, quick and guarded. Jonah exhaled through his nose. "Just eat." She picked up the bread with both hands. For a second, she held it close but did not put it in her mouth. Then, hunger won. She ate in small, controlled bites at first. After the third bite, her control cracked. She tore into it so fast she almost choked. Jonah turned away and busied himself with the stove. Watching hunger was harder than watching blood. When the soup was ready, he put a bowl on the table. She ate that too, though she kept glancing at him between spoonfuls, waiting for instructions that never came. "What's your name?" he asked. She swallowed. "Ruth." "I know." Heard him say it. Silence. "I'm Jonah." "I know," she said. Of course she did. Harlan had used his name. Jonah leaned one shoulder against the wall. He wanted whiskey. He wanted quiet. He wanted this woman to stop looking at him, as if every movement he made carried a hidden cost. "You can sleep on the bed," he said. Her spoon stopped. "I'll sleep out here by the stove." She slowly set the spoon down. Then she stood. The blanket fell from her shoulders. Jonah frowned, thinking she had lost her strength again. But she reached for the buttons of the torn dress with stiff fingers. "What are you doing?" She did not look away. That was the worst part. Her face was calm. Too calm. Dead calm. "What do you want first?" she asked. Jonah stared at her. She spoke like she was discussing weather. "I can work the forge if you show me. I can cook, wash, mend, clean, or—" her voice thinned but did not break. "Or I can lie still. Just don't put the lamp out." The room seemed to tilt. Jonah felt the words hit him somewhere beneath the ribs, deep enough to hurt. Ruth kept her hands on the dress buttons. Her chin lifted a fraction, like she was bracing for a slap. "I need to know the rules." "The rules?" "So I don't make it worse." Jonah could not speak. He had traded a horse in the snow and thought that was the hard part. He had dragged her up a mountain and thought the worst thing in the room was frostbite. But this was worse. This woman believed rescue was just another kind of ownership. She believed food had a price, warmth had a price, a bed had a price, and sooner or later every man came to collect. Jonah stepped back so fast his shoulder hit the wall. Ruth's eyes followed him. He lifted both hands where she could see them. "Button your dress." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Button it," he said, rougher than he meant to. Then he forced his voice lower. "Please." That word unsettled her more than anger would have. Slowly, she closed the buttons. Jonah turned, opened the drawer by the stove, and took out a small skinning knife. Ruth went still. He set the knife on the table, handle toward her. Then he walked to the door, lifted the latch, and pushed it open a few inches. Snow blew in across the floor. "There," he said. "Door's not locked. Knife's there. I'll sleep by the stove. You take the bed." She stared at the knife. "I didn't buy you," he said. Her eyes rose to his. "I traded for the chance to get you out of Voss's hands. That's all. You don't owe me your body. You don't owe me a beating. You don't owe me breath." The fire popped in the stove. Ruth whispered, "Everyone owes somebody." Jonah swallowed. "Not in this house." She looked around the room like she did not understand what kind of place that could be. Jonah took his old spare coat from a peg, rolled it under his head, and lay down on the floor beside the stove. His bones protested. He ignored them. The bed ropes creaked after a long while. He did not turn over. The knife stayed on the table. The door stayed cracked open until the room grew cold enough that Jonah's teeth started to chatter. Even then, he did not get up to close it. He figured she needed the cold proof more than he needed comfort. Sometime after midnight, when the wind was howling hard enough to shake the shutters, Ruth got out of bed. Jonah kept his eyes closed. He heard her cross the floor, heard the soft scrape of wood, heard the door close. Not lock, just close. Then she went back to bed. Jonah lay awake until dawn. Morning came gray and bitter. Jonah woke with a stiff back, a sore knee, and a headache from sleeping on plank boards. For one brief second, he forgot why the bed was occupied. Then he sat up fast. The bed was empty. His heart kicked once, hard. The knife was still on the table. The door was closed. The blanket was folded on the mattress with a neatness that did not belong in his cabin. Then he heard scrubbing. He turned. Ruth was on her knees by the stove, cleaning ash from the hearth with a rag. She wore his coat over her dress. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth. Her hands were raw and red. Blood had opened again at one wrist and smeared across the stone. "Stop," Jonah said. She flinched but kept scrubbing faster. "I said stop." The rag moved harder. Jonah stood. The floor creaked under his boots. Ruth dropped the rag and pressed herself back against the wall, head bowed, shoulders raised. She looked smaller than she had the night before. "I was only cleaning," she said. "I didn't take anything. I didn't say you did. I can do better. That's not what I said. I'll work before breakfast. I know that. I just thought the stove." "Ruth." She stopped talking. Jonah rubbed a hand over his face. He was not built for this. Give him a broken axle and he could fix it. Give him a cracked stove hinge and he could mend it. Give him a horse throwing a shoe in sleet and he could handle it. But a woman standing in his cabin scared of breakfast, that left him feeling like a bear trying to thread a needle. He took a basin from the shelf, poured in water, and set it on the stove just long enough to warm. Then he found clean cloth, a jar of salve, and the old medical tin his wife had kept. He dragged a chair to the middle of the room. "Sit." Ruth looked at the chair. "Sit, please." She obeyed because she thought it was safer than refusing. Jonah knelt in front of her. The moment he reached for her wrist, her breath caught. "I'm looking at the cuts," he said. She held very still. He untied the rag she had wrapped around one wrist. The skin beneath was torn and angry. Rope burns, deep enough to scar. There were older marks, too. Some from work, some from restraint. Some Jonah did not want to name. He dipped cloth in warm water and cleaned the blood. Ruth watched his hands like they were loaded guns. "This'll sting," he said. She nodded once. He dabbed salve over the wounds and wrapped them carefully. Not too tight, not too loose. He had wrapped enough injuries on himself to know the difference. Then he looked at her shoes. They were ruined, thin leather, cracked open at the toes, stiff with frozen mud. He pointed. "Those come off." Her face changed. "No," she whispered. "Your feet are bleeding. I can still work. I didn't ask if you could work. I can stand." "Ruth." She pressed her lips shut. Jonah softened his voice. "I'm not taking anything from you. I need to see if you're frostbit." That word landed. She looked down at her feet like she had forgotten they belonged to her. He unlaced the shoes slowly. One had frozen to the stocking beneath. When he peeled it away, Ruth made a small sound and gripped the chair. Jonah paused. "You want me to stop?" She stared at him. It was the first time he had asked her what she wanted. The question seemed to confuse her so badly that for a moment she forgot to be afraid. Then she whispered, "No." So he kept going. Her feet were in bad shape. Blisters torn open, toes swollen purple, cuts along the soles. Not the worst he had seen, but close enough to make his temper rise hot and useless. He swallowed the anger. Anger had no hands for healing. He washed her feet in the basin, slow and careful. The water turned brown, then pink. Ruth sat above him, silent as a stone statue. Only her breathing gave her away. When he rubbed salve into the cracked skin, a tear fell onto the back of his hand. Jonah looked up. Her face had not changed. No sob. No twist of the mouth. Tears simply slipped down both cheeks as if some hidden place inside her had started leaking. "I don't understand," she said. Jonah sat back on his heels. "What? You're being kind now." He said nothing. "That means it'll be worse later." The words were quiet, but they filled the cabin. Jonah looked at her bandaged wrists, her bruised feet, her hollow cheeks, her eyes that had forgotten how to expect anything good. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, "and you don't have to tell me. But I'm going to say this once, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it. I am not Harlan Voss. I am not whoever taught you to think this way. You're not property here." She looked away. "When the thaw comes," Jonah continued, "you can go. I'll help you get to the valley if that's what you want. If you want to go east, west, south, I don't care. Your life is yours." Her mouth trembled for half a second before she controlled it. "And until then?" she asked. "Until then, you eat when food's on the table. You sleep when you're tired. You don't scrub floors before coffee. And you don't bleed on my hearth unless there's no helping it." That last part almost startled a laugh out of her. Almost. Jonah stood and went to the trunk at the foot of the bed. He opened it slowly. Inside were things he had not touched in years. A blue shawl, a hair comb, a child's knitted cap too small for any living head in that room. Beneath them, wrapped in cloth, was a pair of women's boots lined with wool. His wife's boots. He held them for a moment longer than he meant to. Then he brought them to Ruth. "They'll be big," he said. "Wear 2 pairs of socks." Ruth stared at the boots. "I can't take those." "You can." They were hers. Jonah's chest tightened. "Yes. Then I can't." He set them on the floor near her feet. "She'd be mad if I left them in a trunk while you froze." Ruth looked up at him, and for the first time there was something in her face besides fear and calculation. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the smallest crack where trust could one day enter. That day, Ruth did not scrub the floor again. She sat by the stove with her bandaged feet in wool boots too large for her and watched Jonah make coffee. When he put a cup in her hand, she held it close with both palms, breathing in the steam before taking a sip. After breakfast, she asked what work she could do. Jonah almost told her none. Then he saw the fear start to gather in her eyes at the thought of being useless, so he handed her potatoes and a knife. "Peel slow," he said. "Keep your fingers." She peeled like a woman defusing a bomb. He let her. The first week was hard, not because Ruth complained. She never complained. That was part of what made it hard. She worked until Jonah told her to stop, then looked guilty for stopping. She woke before him every morning and tried to find chores quiet enough not to anger him. She stood when he entered a room. She asked before adding wood to the stove. She ate only after he had taken the first bite, and even then she left half her food unless he told her twice to finish it. At night, she dragged the chair against the door. Jonah pretended not to notice. On the 8th night, she did not move the chair. On the 12th morning, she poured coffee for both of them without asking. On the 15th day, she said his name. Not Sir, not Mr., not Reed. Jonah. The hinge on the pantry door is loose. He was fitting a shoe to a trapper's mule at the time, and the sound of his name in her voice hit him so unexpectedly he nearly dropped the hammer. "I'll fix it," he said. I already did. He looked over. She stood in the doorway wearing his old gray sweater, sleeves rolled to her elbows, one of his screwdrivers in her hand. Her face was thinner than it should have been, but less hollow now. The bruises along her cheek had faded yellow. Her eyes still watched too much, but they no longer darted to every shadow. Jonah grunted. Then why tell me? She looked at the screwdriver as if she had not thought that far. I don't know. Good job, then. Her eyebrows drew together. What? Good job, he repeated. She turned and went back inside. Later he found her crying over the sink, silent and annoyed with herself. He did not ask why. He just put more coffee on. By January, the mountain became a white grave. Snow swallowed the lower windows and sealed the forge from the rest of the territory. The trail disappeared. The pines bowed under ice. Some mornings, the world beyond the door was so bright and empty it hurt to look at. Inside, life settled into a rhythm neither Jonah nor Ruth had expected. Jonah worked the forge when there was work to do, repaired tools, cut wood, and checked snares. Ruth cooked beans, patched shirts, organized nails by size, and learned how to pump the bellows without choking the fire. She had a steady hand, better than most men who claimed they knew forge work. At first, she jumped every time Jonah struck iron. Then she began to learn the sounds. A shaping blow, a flattening blow, a bad blow, a tired blow. You hit different when your shoulder hurts, she said one afternoon. Jonah looked up from the anvil. Do I? Yes. He rolled the shoulder. Old injury. From what? Tree fell wrong. She waited. He gave in. I was the fool cutting it. That got a real smile from her. It was small, barely there, but Jonah saw it, and for the rest of the day he felt like the sun had come through the roof. That worried him. He had not meant to start waiting for her smiles. He had not meant to notice the way she hummed when she forgot to be afraid. He had not meant to feel the cabin grow warmer when she entered it, or colder when she stepped outside to shake rugs in the snow. He was too old for foolishness, he told himself. Ruth was not foolishness. Another part of him answered. She was a person. That was worse. People could leave. People could die. People could take the part of you that had finally softened and leave it exposed to the weather. So Jonah stayed careful. He gave her room. He did not stand too close. He did not touch her unless injury or necessity demanded it. When their hands brushed over a coffee cup, he moved away first. Ruth noticed. Of course she did. One evening, while snow tapped dry against the windows, she sat by the stove, mending his shirt. Jonah sat across from her, sharpening a draw knife. Are you afraid of me? She asked. The question almost made him laugh, but her face was serious. No. You act like I'll break if you get too near. Jonah set the draw knife down. I don't want to scare you. You do sometimes. He looked away. But not because you're near, she said. Because I don't always know when kindness is real. The stove clicked. Wind moved around the cabin walls. Jonah nodded slowly. Fair. She pulled the needle through cloth. You're a strange man, so I've heard. You traded a horse for me. Bad bargain. She looked up. He regretted the joke immediately. But Ruth smiled. For you or for Harlan? Jonah blinked. Then he smiled too. It felt rusty on his face. For Harlan, he said. The peace lasted 17 more days. It broke on a Tuesday afternoon. Jonah was in the forge, working a wagon bracket for a trapper who would not be able to collect it until spring, when the bellows stopped moving. Ruth had been pumping them from the side bench. He looked over. She stood frozen, head turned toward the door. At first, Jonah heard only the hammering of his own work, still ringing in his ears. Then came another sound beneath the wind. Horses, more than one, coming up the buried trail. Jonah set the hammer down. Ruth's face had gone white. "Inside," he said. She did not move. Ruth, her lips parted. "It's him." Jonah crossed to the wall where his rifle usually hung. The hooks were empty. He remembered then. He had left the rifle in the cabin after cleaning it that morning. His revolver was in the drawer by the bed. The only weapon in reach was a heavy hammer and the long iron tongs near the forge. Outside, a man laughed. Jonah stepped out into the snow. Harlan Voss sat on Samson at the edge of the yard. Jonah felt that more than he expected. The horse looked thinner, ribs showing beneath the winter coat. Voss had ridden him hard. 2 men flanked Harlan, both armed. One had a shotgun across his lap. The other held a torch, unlit but ready, wrapped in oilcloth. Harlan smiled like they were meeting in church. "Reed," he called, "you live farther up than common sense allows." Jonah said nothing. Harlan's eyes moved past him to the forge doorway. Ruth stood there. Jonah's voice dropped. "I told you to go inside." "I heard you." Harlan chuckled. "Still stubborn, I see." She was always stubborn. That's the trouble with charity cases. Feed them once and they forget their place. Ruth's hands curled at her sides. Jonah took 1 step forward. "Turn around." "I will," Harlan said. "Soon as I collect what's mine." "She's not yours." "No?" Harlan reached into his coat and pulled out folded papers. "Debt says otherwise. You sold the debt. I sold labor against the debt, not the debt itself. Fine print matters." Jonah knew enough law to know men like Harlan wrote it crooked and called it proper. "What do you want?" Jonah asked. Harlan's smile thinned. "The woman, and the ledger she stole." Jonah glanced back. Ruth did not move, but something in her eyes changed. So it was true. She had taken something. Harlan saw the glance and laughed. "Didn't tell you? Sweet Ruth has a habit of stealing from men who help her." Ruth spoke then, voice quiet but clear. "You wrote every name down." Harlan's face hardened. "Every family," she said. "Every debt you doubled. Every woman you sold south. Every child you charged for medicine you never gave." The 2 riders shifted in their saddles. Jonah looked at Harlan. For the first time, the man's polish cracked. "That book is company property," Harlan said. "That book is a rope," Ruth answered, "around your neck." Harlan stared at her. "You think anyone will listen to you?" "No," she said, "but they might read your handwriting." The wind moved through the yard. Jonah felt pride rise in him, fierce and dangerous. Harlan must have seen it on his face, because he sighed as if disappointed. "I tried to do this politely." The man with the torch struck a match. Jonah moved. He charged through thigh-deep snow with the blacksmith's hammer in one hand. The shotgun rider shouted and swung the barrel toward him. Jonah threw the hammer before the man could fire. It struck the rider in the shoulder and knocked him sideways off his horse. The shotgun went off into the sky. Samson reared. Harlan cursed and fought the reins. The torchman dropped the match but pulled a pistol from his coat. Jonah slammed into him before he could aim. They hit the snow hard. Jonah drove an elbow into the man's jaw, took a punch to the ribs, then another to the ear. Behind him, Ruth screamed his name. Jonah rolled in time to see Harlan draw a revolver. Not at him, at Ruth. Everything slowed. Ruth stood in the forge doorway with nothing in her hands. Snow whipped around her dark hair. She looked small against the mountain, swallowed in Jonah's old sweater and his dead wife's boots. Harlan aimed at her chest. Jonah lunged. The shot cracked open the afternoon. Pain tore across Jonah's right forearm, hot and bright. He hit the ground, rolled, and came up half-blind with snow in his eyes. Harlan cocked the gun again. Then Ruth disappeared into the cabin. For one terrible second, Jonah thought she had run. Good, he told himself. Run. Take a horse. Take the trail. Get free. But she did not run. The cabin door flew open. Ruth stepped back out, holding Jonah's revolver in both hands. Harlan turned the gun toward her. "Put that down," he snapped. Her hands shook. Jonah tried to stand, but his wounded arm failed beneath him. "Ruth," he rasped. She did not look at him. Harlan laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You don't have it in you." Ruth's face was pale. Her eyes were wide, but her feet were planted firm in the snow. "I believed that once," she said. Harlan sneered. "You belong to me." "No," Ruth said. The word carried across the yard. "No," she said again, stronger. "I don't." Harlan's mouth twisted. He raised his revolver. Ruth fired. The shot struck Harlan high in the shoulder and spun him from the saddle. He hit the snow with a sound Jonah would remember for the rest of his life. Samson bolted toward the trees. The torchman, blood on his mouth, took one look at Ruth and the smoking gun. He grabbed the loose shotgun rider by the coat and stumbled toward the remaining horse. "Leave him!" Harlan groaned from the snow. They did not. Within moments, both men were riding hard down the trail, one barely holding on, the other whipping the horse like the devil himself was behind them. Silence returned. Only the wind remained. Ruth kept the gun raised until the riders disappeared between the pines. Then her arms lowered as if the strength had been cut from them. Jonah pushed himself upright. Blood ran down his hand and dripped from his fingers into the snow. Ruth saw it. The gun fell from her hand. She ran to him, stumbling once, then catching herself. "You're bleeding," she said. "So are most men who get shot. That isn't funny." "It wasn't my best." She pressed both hands over the wound. Her fingers were cold, but steady. She looked at the blood, then at his face, then back at the blood. "Lean on me. I'm too heavy." "Jonah." He looked at her. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were wet, but not afraid. "Lean on me," she said again. So he did. For the first time in years, Jonah Reed let another person hold part of his weight. They made it inside slowly. Ruth pushed him onto the bed and went to work like she had been doing it all her life. She cut his sleeve open, poured whiskey over the wound, and ignored his curse when it burned. "It went through the meat," she said. "Sounds bad when you say it like that." "It is bad." "Arm still attached?" "For now." "Then I've had worse." She glared at him. He shut up. She wrapped the wound tight with clean linen, then tied it off with a strip torn from one of his shirts. Her hands moved fast but not careless. When she was done, she sat back on the edge of the bed and stared at the blood on her fingers. Jonah watched her. "You didn't run," he said. She did not answer. "You could have. One of their horses was loose." "I know. The trail's open enough now. You could make the lower valley by dark if you pushed." "I know." He swallowed. "Ruth." She looked at him. "You don't owe me staying." Her face changed then. Something broke, but not in the old way. Not like fear breaking a person down. This was more like ice giving way to running water. "I know," she whispered. Jonah's chest tightened. She looked toward the window, where snow still fell soft against the glass. "That's why I stayed." He had no answer for that. Ruth wiped her hands on a rag. "Besides, you'd burn the beans if I left." Jonah stared. Then he laughed. It hurt his arm, his ribs, and maybe a place deeper than both. But he laughed anyway. Ruth smiled. And this time it was not small. It stayed. Outside, Harlan groaned in the snow. The smile faded. Jonah sighed. We should probably make sure he doesn't freeze before the sheriff can hang him. Ruth's eyes hardened. You think the sheriff will? With that ledger? She looked toward the loose floorboard near the stove. Jonah followed her gaze. That where it is? She nodded. All this time? Yes? And you didn't tell me? I didn't know if kindness changed when money got involved. That hurt, but Jonah understood it. He nodded. Fair. Ruth pulled up the floorboard and took out a leather-bound ledger wrapped in cloth. She set it on the table as if it weighed more than iron. Maybe it did. Names filled the pages. Families, widows, children, debts that doubled and tripled for no reason. Marks beside some names. Sold, transferred, deceased. Jonah read 3 lines and had to stop before rage made him useless again. Ruth stood beside him. I took it the night before Coldwater. That's why he tied me outside. He wanted me scared enough to tell him where it was. Jonah closed the book. You were never a thief. I stole bread too. For a hungry child. I still stole it. Good. She looked at him. He shrugged with his good shoulder. Some bread needs stealing. A quiet laugh escaped her. She covered her mouth like the sound surprised her. Jonah wanted to touch her face then. Not to claim, not to comfort because he thought she needed it. Just because she was there, alive, and the world had not managed to crush the last bit of light from her. He did not move. Ruth saw that too. She stepped closer. Slowly, giving him every chance to back away, she reached out and touched his cheek. Her fingers were cold from the yard. Jonah closed his eyes for half a breath. I'm not afraid right now, she said. He opened his eyes. No? No. His voice came out rough. I am. That made her smile again. Of me? Of wanting you to stay. The honesty settled between them, warm and dangerous. Ruth's hand remained on his cheek. Ask me in spring. Jonah nodded. I can do that. And until then, you eat when food's on the table. And I don't scrub floors before coffee. Never. And I don't owe you breath. His throat tightened. Not one breath. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. It was not a kiss. Not yet. It was better. It was trust, standing at the edge of something new. Still scared, still shaking, but no longer alone. Spring did not come quickly. It never does in the mountains. Harlan lived, though he complained enough on the sled down to the valley that Jonah considered leaving him in a drift more than once. The sheriff took the ledger. Then the marshal took Harlan. Then people started coming forward from wagon camps, mining roads, and settlement cabins, with stories that matched the handwriting in the book. Harlan Voss had built his life on debts people could never repay. Ruth had carried the proof under Jonah's floorboards all winter. By the time the first thaw softened the trail, Coldwater Station was under new management. 2 of Harlan's men had fled the territory, and Jonah had Samson back in his yard. The horse was thinner and meaner, but alive. Ruth fed him an apple slice and told him he had poor judgment in people. Jonah said the horse had learned from him. On the first warm morning of spring, Jonah hitched Samson to a small wagon. He packed flour, coffee, blankets, and a purse of money from Harlan's seized accounts. Not much, but enough to start somewhere. He set the reins on the wagon seat and stepped back. Ruth stood by the door in the blue shawl that had once belonged to Jonah's wife. She had asked before wearing it. Jonah had told her the same thing he had told her about the boots. She'd be mad if it stayed in the trunk. Now Ruth looked at the wagon, then at him. The valley road is clear, Jonah said. I see that. I told you I'd help you go when the thaw came. You did. So, he cleared his throat. There it is. Ruth walked to the wagon and touched the folded blanket on the seat. You packed coffee. You're mean without it. I am not. You are. She smiled, but her eyes were bright. Jonah forced himself to keep still. Every selfish part of him wanted to ask her to stay. Every decent part of him knew she had been asked, ordered, bought, sold, and trapped enough for one lifetime. So he said nothing. Ruth climbed onto the wagon seat. Jonah's heart folded in on itself. Then she picked up the reins, looked down at him, and said, "Well?" He blinked. "Well, what? Are you coming?" Jonah stared at her. She lifted one eyebrow. "I can drive, but I don't know the lower road past Miller's Creek. And someone has to make sure you don't bleed on yourself if that arm opens again. You're not leaving?" "I am." His chest went hollow. Then she said, "I'm leaving the mountain for the day. I want to see the valley without running from anyone." Jonah let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Ruth's smile softened. "And after that, I'd like to come home." Home. The word moved through him like fire through cold iron. He climbed onto the wagon beside her. They rode down the mountain under a pale blue sky, past melting drifts and black pines dripping sunlight. The road was muddy. The wagon wheels complained. Samson tossed his head like he had opinions about everything. Ruth sat straight beside Jonah, not because fear held her rigid, but because the morning was hers, and she wanted to see all of it. At the bend overlooking the valley, she pulled the horse to a stop. Below them, the world opened wide. Brown fields, silver creek water, smoke rising from cabins. The freight road cutting west, toward places neither of them had seen. Jonah waited. Ruth looked for a long time. Then she reached over and took his hand. Not because she owed him, not because she was afraid, because she chose to. And Jonah, who had once believed his life had ended with the people he buried, held her hand gently and watched the thaw come in. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know what part hit you the hardest. Would you have traded your last horse to save a stranger in the middle of winter? And if you were Ruth, after everything she survived, would you have been able to trust Jonah's kindness? Sometimes the smallest act of mercy can change the whole direction of someone's life. And sometimes love doesn't arrive with pretty words. Sometimes it shows up as warm boots, a bowl of soup, an unlocked door, and someone strong enough to say, "You don't owe me a thing." If you enjoy grounded frontier stories about survival, healing, and second chances, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more.